You're listening to The Network Effect, the essential value of partnerships through the lens of route-to-market models, tech stacks, and continuing proof that two brains are better than one. Here's your Network Effect host, Bryn Netesheim.
And now it's time to welcome Frie Pétré, CEO and founder of Qollabi, to The Network Effect. Our guests are esteemed leaders and experts entrenched in the day-to-day work of getting products and services to market through strategic partnerships and alliances. He's here to dig into the many layers of why as a domain expert, answer questions, and share his unique experiences. Frie, it's great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Bryn and Larry, for having me. Happy to be here.
Excellent. Well, I'm excited to jump in. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who Qollabi is and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Qollabi makes partner success predictable, and we do that with mutual success planning. And the way we do that is by connecting partner data and automate accountability, so you don't need to worry about getting things done, basically.
Very interesting. We know that we have a lot of our clients and the channel world at large who's very interested in making that conversation between partners and vendors more easy to have, and also gaining insights into the data and the key intelligence that can be generated from those conversations and those planning activities. So tell us a little bit more then about how Qollabi can specifically be used within an organization.
Yeah, so the way you can best look at it is nothing different than what happened, let's say 10, 15 years ago when CRM came into the market. If you would ask at that point, if you would ask sales leadership or C-level about what to expect in terms of direct sales results the coming months, they would say, well, they would need to go to their different team members and ask them what they thought that was coming into the pipeline. There was no system gathering, and it was really hard to have a methodology to predict and customer success, so to speak. So CRM totally created an entire methodology around making direct sales more predictable. What we are doing is totally doing the same thing, but within an indirect sales context. So think about what could be the methodology, what could be the playbook that organizations could install in the same way they did it with direct sales, but with indirect sales. That's basically what we're after here.
One thing that I think of off the top of my head is how you communicate that information and in what time periods and cadence. And the first thing that comes to my mind are QBRs. So is Qollabi perhaps a tool that could make QBRs easier or enable those?
Yeah, totally. I think there's a huge paradigm shift that is happening, and more customers that are dealing with indirect sales channels are starting to realize that. What we have seen the last decades was, let's say, the word business planning that was often used in organizations, and it was mainly an exercise, sometimes a theoretical exercise that was asked from leadership to the teams, to the channel teams, so to speak. And so that was mainly an exercise that was done at the end of the year and maybe a couple of times a year, but it was mainly vendor and internal driven. And it was also considered as optional to do this planning with their partners on the best partners. So it was never a starting point. So the paradigm shift that we see happening is that why should we wait for a QBR? And why should we even do planning? So it's more also an existential question that is out there. And we see a tremendous shift towards the idea of, instead of business planning, the idea of mutual success planning. And to your question, this is something that should be at any point in time, the starting point, any conversation that you have with your partner. The question that you should ask is, hey, we're here together. What does success look like in the next phase of our partnership? So basically, it totally shifts from a quarterly base to an instant base.
Right. It's these opportunities that are able to be created with easy, simple, transparent communication, right? So issues don't build up until the end of the quarter. You get all these little weekly check-ins, and, and perhaps on different levels within the organization between a partner organization and a vendor, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you touched on something that is, I think, very interesting to consider is like, first of all, there is the cadence to which you have these conversations. Then obviously the content of this conversation that switches in terms of, well, let's think about both objectives mutually instead of a partner program that gets pushed and you need to just execute. So there's one dimension, but the other dimension you're touching upon is the idea of silos, where basically a partner plan or a mutual success plan is basically the work of an entire organization, where every different sides of the organization are collaborating and should collaborate. And so that question of how does success look like is not only an external question to your partner, but it's also an internal question that you should ask to these different, let's say, traditional silos. And you should make sure that you every single day you keep aligned on that single objective that you're all trying to achieve.
Larry, how about you share, please, some things that we see within our clients and the obstacles and challenges that they have relative to perhaps maybe sometimes forgetting to involve the partners in the plans that they're making.
Nah, why would we do that? Actually, that's kind of what we hear. And Frie, I really want to know a little bit more of your thoughts on this as well, because Brendan and I and the Channelnomics team, we encounter this frequently, is that there is something called planning out in the, can we call it the vendorverse? I like that, vendorverse.
I think we should use that more often. Yes.
It really, yeah, Foley has a Doctor Strange vibe to it.
The vendorverse, that's it, right?
Yeah, the vendorverse. Yeah. Okay, it's been
like
coined. Okay, it's now official. It's here.
Put it on your LinkedIn, Larry. I cannot wait. Official point. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to change my title right now to vendorverse scientist.
That's it.
Is there going to be like a hand graphic involved?
We're onto something.
You know what? They really will. It's a hand graphic. It'll look a lot like a bird, but so. No, but seriously, getting back to the topic at hand, is that, look, we see this frequently, is that the vendors will say that they do business planning. They'll even write it into their channel programs as a requirement for partners, but it's typically one-sided. The channel account manager is actually doing account planning, not business planning. And it's frustrating because I don't know how I, as a partner, would feel knowing that there was a plan for me that I had no input into. And no control into. And I was being evaluated and measured on this as much as the account manager is. So why don't you tell us, because I'm curious, we see this and I have some insights, I guess, and some theories as to why this happens. But do you see this? Is this one of the things that you and Qollabi bounce into?
Yeah, I mean, totally. It is really about understanding. I think it all boils down to kind of the capabilities that you can build in your channel organization in order to have enough business acumen to understand the playbook, to understand the dynamics, the dimensions as well, to make a partnership successful. And I think it all starts there. It's a complex, we can compare it with complex selling. I mean, the same thing that if you have a more indirect sales, a more direct selling, traditional transactional way of working, you also have the consultative selling approach, where there's more complex components to take into consideration. And I think the partnership workflow, we can consider them as a very complex workflow where we need to take into consideration different dimensions. And I think that is often the lack of the awareness in channel organizations, that it is really a complex process where we need to take care of the different dimensions in order to drive a conversation. And it's not just, having meetings, discussing some opportunities, and think a bit more strategically about what we want to achieve. I think it's really the lack of why should we do that? it's just not part of the DNA. That's where I would say my first response to your question. But I'm very curious to hear what your findings are.
Well, look, my observation is that you're right. It's a DNA issue. Again, coming back to my new scientist role, it's about DNA. I find though is that it's because planning is hard. Well, I shouldn't say planning is hard. Making a plan is relatively easy. Staying to a plan, or at least knowing what to do with a plan, is hard. And I think people get hung up on two things. I'm going to, as a veteran, I tend to lean back on my military history, so bear with me a little bit on this. Eisenhower said planning is useless, or plans are useless, but planning is everything. Meaning that you had to have marshal the resources, have understanding and situational awareness, and the plan gives you context in which to make decisions. Whereas Patton said many things, but a moderately good plan or a poor plan vigorously executed today is better than a perfect plan later. Or words to that effect. Please, whoever's listening to this, don't hold me accountable. I don't have it in front of me. I think one of the things that gets in the way is that this entire idea of, first, planning is hard. Getting down to a plan and knowing that you're going to be held accountable is hard. The second part of it is that planning takes time. And it is a difficult thing for people that, when they have so much happening on the day-to-day, for them to actually sit down and think beyond, what they have in front of them right now versus what they have in front of them tomorrow. Thinking 6 months, 12 months ahead is really difficult. And the third thing is that the collaborative piece of this is that you actually have to go and get agreement. And that's hard. And then if you look at some of the business planning programs that we've developed, we call for internal accountability as well. Is that plan has to be made, has to be signed off by the partner, the CAM has to agree, the channel account manager has to agree to it, and then their supervisor or their regional manager has to agree to it as well. That's a really big step in cultural change that a lot of companies just can't get around.
Exactly. I mean, maybe Bryn, you have something to add to that.
I have a few things to add to that. I think there's another obstacle in that we often see, and that is a lack of proper business acumen for the channel managers who need to go out and craft and facilitate these plans with their partners, right? You were talking earlier about the complexity within a partner's business. If they don't see that, they don't have the right training to execute it and facilitate these plans, that's another gap.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because you're right, is that the role of the channel account manager before, or historically, has been to drive sales. Go out there, get the partner to do something today, get an order in, get that order transacted or fulfilled, and move on to the next thing. Here we are now in the Ecoverse world, and just made a new one. So, but in this entire idea of having interconnected systems or attached systems, particularly in cloud-based or solution systems-based selling, now it's about retaining the customer and adding on a creative value and total lifetime and total contract value of the customer. The role has now changed, and we've had clients come to us saying, we don't need salespeople, we need business development people. And that is an entirely different skill set.
Yeah, 100%. It's so interesting what you just said, because indeed, the reason why it becomes so critical now and the coming decade, it will be becoming more critical, the business acumen around planning and why planning is so important, is that there is so many things are happening on the macro level, where the role of the intermediary is changing. And this is happening in different industries, not only in IT, we see it in financial services as well, where basically the type of products that were sold by an insurance company and by a insurance broker was transactional products like, a car insurance and so forth. And so it was very much the same kind of box moving motion that we see in IT, but now all of a sudden these kind of products can be sold directly online. So the role of the intermediary changed. And as a consequence, financial service providers and insurance companies need to reconsider the role of the channel account manager to become more a business consultant with their intermediaries, to think about how they can help and how they can partner and drive business from both sides. And that's a very intriguing trend that is happening at this moment.
one thing I do know about Qollabi is you approach your planning with a slightly different philosophy, and that is based around OKRs as opposed to general, here's a goal, here are the aligning set of specific activities, and it's very concrete. So tell me a little bit more about how that dovetails into what we were just talking about.
Yeah, there's this fascinating parallel that I see that we can apply in an indirect sales context compared to a direct sales context. Like 10 years ago, I think, around 12 years ago or something, there was this book called Predictable Revenue from Aaron Ross, I think, in the SaaS world. And it totally changed the way SaaS businesses organize their teams and organize their go-to-market motion in a way more predictable way. And this is basically the underlying, it went hand in hand with the arrival of CRM and Salesforce and so forth, where basically in the beginning, there was a huge resistance from sales teams that they needed to use a CRM to be mechanical and start to think about their funnel, meaning how much leads do I need to have in order to get my quota, and what are the underlying activities in order to get there. That book is still the leading principle of any sales organization out there. And now it's not only leadership who's asking for it, but it's like the account managers, the account executives, that are using it and are expecting it. So what is the model? What is a similar model, similar playbook in the indirect sales context? And what we found was that OKRs would be the best fit and already proven methodology that would fit that niche, that would fit that gap that we have today, where basically there's no prescribed model in order to make partner success predictable. So what it does basically something very similar to what a funnel does in direct sales. Like I just said, like we have our quota, what are the initiatives and playbooks, the initiatives in order to get there? Well, the same principle counts for partner planning. The same principle counts for, okay, let's define what success looks like. And it can be revenue, but it can also be a joint marketing result that you want to achieve. It can be a certain kind of training or co-servicing model that you're setting up. So for every of these critical parts of your activities and partner success that you define and that you desire, you're going to split it up in terms of lagging indicators that are often the end result and leading indicators. And you can go as granular as possible and you make it as measurable as possible. And only doing that exercise, we have seen that it leads up to 15% more productivity. It's actually a study done by Deloitte in Europe with 400 partner plans. And they just realized that applying the OKR methodology already increases the chances of success by 15%. Now, the planning point of Larry, they followed up on those that were using it and continuously planning. We saw a significant correlation up to 35% in increased revenue. And I know, if I'm not mistaken, you guys have also done some studies around this also, right? The impact of planning and how that turns out.
Yeah, no, we have, and we've seen it. Well, it's not studies. We're looking at actually formalizing some new research on this, but we've done reviews of our clients' performance data, and we do note this, is that partners with business plans tend to outperform partners without business plans by 2x to 5x. Now,
Wow.
Mileage will vary. I mean, it's a pretty significant gap.
Mm-hmm.
But what did we find? Because the question typically follows up with is, what's in the business plan that's driving that differential performance? And the only thing that we've really seen so far is that the presence of a business plan, the agreement, the perception of accountability is enough to actually drive, at least in part of the way, there's other factors as well, part of the way drive that level of commitment and investment on the partner's part. One of the things that we hear from the partners, though, is that because there's a perception in the vendorverse that the partners don't want to do planning. The reality is that the partners want plans. Their experience is that it's the vendors that don't commit to them. The vendors, because there's so much churn within the vendor organizations, the vendors live by the quarter, and if one quarter isn't going well, they'll change their plans, they'll rejigger their priorities, they will move off target. And that really does that really does screw up partners' ability to effectuate real plans. And Free, I got to tell you, I really like the approach that Qollabi has taken by baking in OKRs into your methodology. I really have no idea what OKRs are, but I did read this book, and
There you go.
Yeah, look, no, seriously, guys, I did, because I started hearing about OKRs a few years ago. This book by John Doerr, he is one of the principals at Kleiner Perkins, the private equity firm behind many of the more successful technology companies in Silicon Valley, put this together really as a guide. This really is like a definitive guide to OKRs, and it does provide. And you know what? And here's the thing: if it's good enough for Bono, it's good enough for the rest of us.
I love that.
That's a standard measure.
Yeah. I mean, the world really should be measured in Bonos.
No, I was what have been, so first of all, to the point that you were making about vendors don't think that partners like planning and like a plan. Actually, we were just blown away when we first released our first features that included the partner into the planning process, and everybody was like, this has never been done before. This was a vision we had, and our customers was saying, I'm not sure they're going to use the partners are going to use and going to like it. We were just blown away. The reactions were so positive. They just loved the idea that, their partner, the vendor, they knew what they were doing, that they had a plan. It provided so much structure, and it really created this kind of sense of joint success, doing this together. And I think we're just at the start of this entire, let's say, paradigm shift and transformation, where basically mutual success planning between partners is going to be the standard.
I think the partners yearn for direction from the vendors. The vendors, when they come to Channelnomics, they come to us because they want us to help them with their strategy, to bring clarity to their go-to-markets, their go-to-market plans, their strategies, their operations. And the vendors have been conditioned to think in terms of give X, get Y back. So if we give them this incentive, then they're going to return with something that we want, typically revenue. We give them a cookie, they'll bring us back a banana. So this is the thing about, that's the classical view of the vendor look at the partners. The partners don't. The partners aren't sitting there thinking about, today I'm going to wake up and I'm going to sell so many licenses, there's so many cloud subscriptions, there's so many boxes. They're thinking about what their customer needs. And so if the vendors took the time to ask the partners, what is it that you need, or what is it that we need you to do, or what is it that your customers are doing, and where do we see mutual opportunities? And then you document that down into a set of strategic objectives, into activities designed to reach those objectives. I don't know, things that start to look like a plan. Then you have a roadmap that assures that you both get to the same place that you want to go.
I think this is really brilliant. And I think it's so important we also reconsider some of the old terminology to really make it super clear what we're doing here with OKR. But it can be sometimes it can be frightening to have that word OKR. And business planning, we hear it sometimes from time to time as well, that it like scares people away. Oh, this is something theoretical and we need to start thinking in a document and so forth. And that, I think, that's not helping us. And so what could be the other side of the story, which is exactly how you just said it, is like, ask this one question to your partner. Ask the question, what does success look like for you this year? And what you have your goal. And then you start to kind of make different compartments of that. Okay, so in order to achieve that, what are the things you want to do? Okay, there are 4 domains. Okay, in these 4 domains, what are the key initiatives that will help you to get there? And just documenting that you just said, well, then what you're doing is making a mutual success plan. But it's so motivating because in the initiatives, obviously, you're going to think, how can I help you that drive my objectives? And if you're vocal about it and transparent about it, then there's this huge motivation and use motivation that is installing. And that is basically where the magic happens. But I haven't used the word business planning into this or OKR. It was just like the words, what does success look like? And let's define how we can basically put this into practice.
Right. And before we forget, Bryn, I think we need to define, for those who don't know, OKR stands for Objectives and Key Results. So it's, like I said, it's, if you want to know more, it's in this book. I'm not getting a royalty.
And there's also another one that we made a summary out of it for those who are not that's so much of a big reader. We have summarized the book Cracking the Sales Management Code. Michel Vazana and Jason Jordan. I'm not sure if it's Jason Jordan, it's the guy from Wolf of Wall Street. Anyhow, you will find the book and we made a summary, so happy to share it.
When you talk about what information to put in there, our clients tend to say, but exactly what should it be? So from your experience with your customers, what are some nice to have pieces of information, and what are some of the essential bits that need to be put in?
Yeah, definitely. So this is always we get that question quite often, and it's dangerous. It's tricky. Let's put it like that to start. So first of all, as we just said, it's so important to have that vision right. Why are we doing this? And if we have a buy-in from the team, and definitely, first of all, the leadership, then we know why we're doing this. Because if you have a conversation with someone who buys into it and you ask the question, so what should be in there? Well, all of a sudden, the risk that you can have is that you start defining 5-6 different domains, and it becomes so complex and it becomes just monstrous. This is a mistake we made in our first years, because I come from a consultancy background and I just love making all these beautiful models and stuff to make it intellectually work. But that's not how it works in practice, and definitely not in the daily job of a channel account manager. So we need to be very careful of let's saying, okay, this is what there what should be into the plan. But so if you look at mainly the different domains and the compartments or the building blocks that we see coming back in different industries, is pretty straightforward. We have almost every time we have a revenue component, and that revenue component where we just talk about bookings, and then there's this different parts of the revenue that is basically getting cataloged. We pull it from Salesforce. You have a clean overview on what are the different, let's say, funnel metrics in order to achieve your revenue. So that would be part number plan of the first compartment of your plan. And the second part is everything around marketing. It is, what are the co-marketing initiatives that we can take together? What can we commit upon? And what are your preferences? And actually providing some kind of a menu, a blueprint that you can discuss with your partner, and just mute it, select it, what do you want, what you don't want, and then put the different leading indicators and initiatives below it in order to drive that common co-marketing initiatives. Then there is a part that we often see coming back is around enablement and training. So, okay, where are we at now in terms of enablement? How do we score ourselves in terms of where we think our capabilities are in order to jointly achieve common results?
Another obstacle to success in that enablement is that oftentimes channel individuals and leaders are speaking a very different language than finance. They're talking about the same thing, but they're using different words and maybe different metrics in a scarier point. So it's about the channel's ability to educate and manage upward to make sure that they are communicating in the right words what success has transpired and what that looks like.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that it needs to go both ways. I truly believe, and this is also part of our mission, is to enable channel teams to make a business case that they can carry to their leadership. And it's not only about a business case about we need to, this is working, but it's also about we need more resources, because the time that they have such a hard time explaining their leadership that they need more resources, whereas the leadership is maybe thinking that they can do it with less. I hear it all the time. So this is already, we can work on that. And obviously OKRs and having that transparency helps big time to make that business case. But it also starts with the top layer, where basically that mind shift, and I think you guys, Channelnomics, can play a huge role there in the marketplace to just open the minds of leadership. Like if you're investing in a channel, you cannot think about your channel without having the right metrics and measurement in place in order to understand the ROI. So if you invest in the channel, This is the same thing with your CRM. Can you imagine that you don't know what's happening on the end customer, on your end customer data? This is just a world that we are in that is just unimaginable. So it's both layers, I think, that can be inspired.
How do you know it's working?
That is a very good one.
Seriously, that is a great question.
What do you think yourself?
Ooh, that's very political of you. Returning the question with a question. I think it comes down to, we talked a lot about setting goals and getting buy-in with your senior leadership. If you're not getting questioned on if it's working, I think that's actually a really good indicator. But it's also simply about how you measure engagement. Are people using it? Is your internal team using it? Are your partners using it? That to me is the first and most basic measure of, is it working?
Mm-hmm.
What else are you going to add to that?
Well, it's actually, thank you for responding to that, because I would push back a little bit on that, because it's not straightforward, in my opinion. And do you know when it's working? Because it's what salespeople and commercial people like to do is the path of the least resistance. And this is something that we've seen also in direct sales. If they like to just do what they do and they believe that what they've been doing for the last so many years, this is the right way to do so. So this is not a question about, does Qollabi work? This is more about, do you believe in a structured way of working where defining what success looks like and using a structured methodology to achieve results? Do you believe in that vision and that methodology? And how do you know that that works? Well, there is a lot of studies, including yours, that show basically up to 35% in increase in productivity if you have the structured approach. So how do you know it works? When basically you can show that those who are working in a structured way are being more successful than the mass who is not doing that. And that has been shown in multiple studies before. Now, how do you know whether Qollabi works? That is for a big part also dependable on the equation on whether or not sales leadership, channel leadership are able to evoke the right message and why around this should change. And if you can see that basically more and more of your channel team members are working in a structured way of working, because then immediately you know that success will follow. So it's a little bit colored, I would say, my answer to that. Larry, curious to hear what you think about that.
I just have a simple way of answering that question. How do you know it's working? How do you know Qollabi's working? Get a demo. I mean, just, reach out to Qollabi and just see for yourself. I've looked at this, at their tool, their platform a number of times. I find it to be simple and intuitive. Well, I should say relatively simple. I mean, it does require a fair amount of thought and setup and fine tuning, but that is a translation of strategy into a platform that achieves this type of structured communications and planning that Frie is talking about. So I believe in business planning with partners. I think that it is an essential, it's not just about the revenue returns, whether it's revenue, whether it's gross profit, or whether it's growth. It's also about measuring the progress towards change. And that's one of the things I really like about your platform. It is not purely about revenue. It's really about driving systemic performance across the entire spectrum of business activities that make partnerships and partners better.
Well, thank you so much for saying that, Larry, and then very much agree. And to that part where you were referring to, it requires some translation of strategy into execution. This is where you guys come in, and why we love to partner with you guys, because you just understand the methodology and you just know the customer way better than we do in order to drive that transformation at these customer side. And it's really these two hand in hand, the vision, the methodology, combined with the best in class technology, I think is just the mix for any customer to consider and to drive change in their organization.
I can't think of a more perfect way to conclude our podcast than that last bit that we had there. Frie, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate your time and all of the knowledge and information you shared.
I love being here. Thank you so much, Brynn and Larry, for having me.
Thanks for being here.
The Network Effect is a production of Channelnomics, a business strategy and research firm focused on improving the performance of direct and indirect channels through their portfolio of strategy, intelligence, and enablement services. Find them at channelnomics.com. Be sure to subscribe to The Network Effect on Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll never miss an episode. And before you go, show some love with a review. We love to hear your feedback. For all of us here at The Network Effect and Channelnomics, thanks for listening.